In the Pokemon TCG, how good an expansion actually is can be viewed in several ways. It could be based on the actual cards and the cool artwork in the set that's exclusive to it. For example, expansions like Prismatic Evolution have chase cards that are pretty expensive, so some people might say that is a really good set because of that. The topic of today's video, however, is how good a set is for competitive play. This can largely be deduced by looking at the individual cards in the set, their impacts and how good they did in pro tournaments, and the extent to which they did so. For example, Shining Legends, despite having very few playable cards, had Zoroark GX, which was so good that it makes Shining Legends a good set regardless of the other cards in it. The topic of today's video is a set from the Sword and Shield era, so let's talk about it. Lost Origin was released in 2022 right after the Pokemon World Championships in 2022. This set would bring back the Lost Zone mechanic to the TCG for the first time since the Lost Thunder expansion in 2018. The Lost Zone is an area on the field where cards can't be interacted with ever again. Basically, if a card somehow ends up in the Lost Zone, it's gone for the rest of the game. This might seem like a bad thing, but Lost Origin had several cards that benefited a player for getting cards into their Lost Zone. First, Cramorant has the Spit Innocently attack, which does 110 damage for 3 energy. But if you have 4 or more cards in the Lost Zone, all of Cramorant's attacks have no cost. This doesn't only apply for Spit Innocently, but it also works for Technical Machine cards that were printed in the Scarlet and Violet era. With Crisis Punch, Cramorant could be a deadly late game attacker, doing 280 damage for 0 energy at the very end of the game. However, it is mostly Cramorant's early game pressure and decent chip damage that make it a staple inclusion in any Lost Zone deck. This next card is either the best or second best Lost Zone card in the set, however. Mirage Gate is an item card that, if you have 7 or more cards in your Lost Zone, you can attach up to 2 basic energy of different types from your deck to your Pokemon in any way you like. This is hands down some of the best energy acceleration we have ever seen in the Pokemon TCG. It's just an item card. You can play 4 of them in a game, and you can get up to 8 basic energy from your deck attached to your Pokemon. Insane. And the quote-unquote drawback of having to have 7 cards in your Lost Zone isn't actually that bad, as you'll see later. Now, you do have to attach different types of basic energy, but this isn't as bad because most of the typical Lost Zone attackers have either colorless in some of their attack costs, or they require very little energy. Now, the last and probably most infamous Lost Zone card is Sablaye. Lost Mine, if you have 10 or more cards in your Lost Zone, lets you spread 12 damage counters on your opponent's board in any way you like, for just 1 psychic energy. This is honestly some of the best spread damage ever, and it had such a chokehold on the format that evolving decks with low HP basics were almost entirely shut out of the game, unless it's Charizard EX, and even that often struggled versus the Lost Box archetype. But what's the point in playing all these cards that interact with the Lost Zone if you can't even get cards there in the first place? Well, Comfey and Chorus Experiment are here to change that. Comfey, once per turn while it's in the active spot, lets you look at the top 2 cards of your deck, keep one, and put the other into the Lost Zone with its flower selecting ability. This is the entire engine and backbone of the deck. Players often attempt to get 2 or 3, maybe even 4 Comfey out as soon as possible, and use a ton of cards like Switch Cart, Escape Rope, and Switch to get as many uses of flower selecting in a turn as possible. Not only did it fuel your Lost Zone, but the extra card draw and filtering of your deck went a long way with consistency and playing into late game win conditions like Kyogre from Celebrations. This was a common Lost Box attacker which could end games very easily with its Aqua Storm attack, combined with an energy recycler to make sure all 5 cards in your deck were energy, meaning you could do 250 damage to 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon, ending the game very easily. Colorus Experiment is a supporter card that lets you look at the top 5 cards of your deck, put 3 of them into your hand, and put the other 2 into the Lost Zone. This is incredible not just for drawing cards, but also filtering out your deck with useless cards, and Lost Zoning useless resources like Battle VIP passes in the mid to late game. With a combination of Comfey, Colorus Experiment, Lost Vacuum, which we will get to later, and Switch, you could easily get the requirements for Mirage Gate and Sablaye by turn 2 or turn 3. But what attacker could possibly be the recipient of those energies from Mirage Gate? One of the most common options was Giratina VSTAR from the same set with the Lost Impact attack. 280 damage for 3 energy, and then you have to put 2 energy from your Pokemon into the Lost Zone. This damage output is quite frankly incredible, and the attack cost is easy to fulfill with one Mirage Gate and a manual attachment. Star Requiem, Giratina's V-Star power, if you have 10 or more cards in the Lost Zone, just straight up knocks out anything in your opponent's active spot for just 2 energy. This is a great attack for dealing with higher HP threats like Charizard EX or Dragapult EX. Lost Tina won several regionals and was a top tier meta deck for a good amount of time. It was also played with Arceus V-Star and is a staple inclusion in the great Regidrago V-Star deck, which we'll talk about a little more later since some other cards from this set are good there too. Giratina V-Star will go down as one of the best attackers of the Sword and Shield era. Now, this set is much more than just the Lost Zone archetypes. So let's do a speedrun of some of the best cards from the set before we get into the real heavy hitters. Netherworld Gate Gengar and Hisuian Zoroark V-Star combined with Damage Pump, all from this set, could deal lots of damage to the opponent's active Pokemon really quickly with Zoroark's attack, which could be fulfilled with one double turbo energy, and it does 50 damage for each of your Pokemon that have damage counters on them. Gengar puts itself onto the bench and puts 30 damage on it. So, if you put a Gengar into play, you can use Damage Pump, which moves 2 damage counters from one of your Pokemon to the others in any way you like, in combination in order to fill up your bench with damaged Pokemon. You could also use the Gapejaw Bog Stadium card to do this as well. It wasn't really ever a top tier deck, but it was always something to keep in the back of your mind, and it was something you could play at a tournament here or there. It has some day 2 finishes at events. Radiant Gardevoir has the Loving Veil ability, which was used in a variety of decks for its splashable damage reduction from V Pokemon. 20 extra damage being reduced is incredible, and as you probably know from one of my previous videos, matters a lot. Arceus decks were the main user, but also it saw inclusions in control decks like Mewtwo V Union, which even won a regional in Toronto. Puppet Offering Bayonet has a Versus Seeker on an ability, letting you put a supporter from the discard pile into your hand. But you have to Lost Zone Bayonet and all cards attached to it afterwards. This was used to some success with the Bayonet EX archetype where you would item lock your opponent, since the extra versatility from the same evolution line was really valuable. It's also seen play in Lost Zone decks, sometimes as an extra way to get Colard's Experiment back, and Lost Zone more cards, and it's also recently seen play with Archaludon EX as an extra way to grab Professor Turo's Scenario to heal your Archaludon. Mawile has the Tempting Trap attack, which became the go-to retreat lock attack from the day of its release to the day of its rotation in a few weeks. It has seen play in countless decks because of its 1 energy attack cost being so splashable. It was initially most common in Lost Box decks as an alternate win condition, but it recently also won a regional in a Gardevoir EX deck as a supplementary attacker that could help stall out tougher matchups like Miraidon and Fixed Math. This is a great card and we will for sure miss it. Cresselia was used occasionally in the aforementioned Gardevoir EX decks, even getting second at Worlds, mostly because of its utility against Sablaye in the Lost Box matchup. It can remove 2 damage counters from each of your Pokemon and put them onto one of your opponents. So against a Sablaye, it could remove all the damage it set up and heal you. Kyurem VMAX has an incredible attack and an ability that can accelerate energy, but it just never really sustained any long-term success. Despite this, it saw some good usage and got several top 8 and top 4 placements early in its lifespan, so it's worth mentioning. Aerodactyl V-Star can completely turn off V Pokemon abilities for the rest of the game with this Ancient Star V-Star power. This was great against the best deck in format, Peak Lugia V-Star, and it even won a regional in a Vikavolt item lock deck as a way to counter Lugia. Pidgeot V has seen success mostly in Snorlax control decks as a way to shuffle itself into your deck and prevent decking out, with its Vanishing Wings ability, but it's also seen play in Lost Box decks for a similar purpose. Snorlax has the Unfazed Fat ability, preventing effects of attacks done to it, and its Thumping Snore attack does 180 damage for 3 colorless energy. This attack cost is very splashable since any deck can theoretically take use of this, and it saw play and good success in Lugia V-Star decks after the rotation of the special energies. It's a bulky 1-prize attacker that could help offset the prize trade, and it definitely had a niche in the format. Bouffalant saw play in Pidgeot control decks, mostly for its first attack, Lost Headbutt, which allows you to permanently remove your opponent's energy by sending it to the Lost Zone. Box of Disasters saw play in Mew VMAX decks as a way to get some extra chip damage down on Charizard EX after they would take a one-shot on a Mew, or Drapion V, which we will get to later. Lost City is a stadium card that sends any Pokemon that is knocked out on both sides to the Lost Zone. This saw and continues to see play for its versatility when knocking out key 1-of attackers, or key support Pokemon like Pheasantipede EX, Dusknoir, and evolving basics such as Charmander or Pidgey. Misfortune Sisters sees play in Snorlax and control decks for its unrivaled ability to mill item cards from the opponent's deck. Even though it's just the top 5 cards, time and time again, this card provides some value every time you play it down. Gift Energy is a staple in Lugia V-Star decks, and it lets you draw until you have 7 cards in your hand if the Pokemon it is attached to is knocked out. This draw power isn't just good in the already inconsistent Lugia decks, but also for any deck that can run one, because the extra value of draw power is super important. This sort of draw power on your opponent's turn can make or break a game, especially after a late game Iono. Hisuian Gudra VSTAR was its own archetype for a while with good success, mostly paired with Arceus or the Lost Zone engine to accelerate energy. Rolling Iron does a solid 200 damage and reduces damage done to Gudra by 80 next turn. This makes it really hard to knock out, and if you couldn't knock it out in one hit, Moisture Star could really punish you because it would heal Gudra fully. It continues to see top tier success in Regidrago decks as an attacker that can be used in a variety of matchups, but mostly the mirror match. Delphox V sees play right now in Gouging Fire EX decks as a versatile bench snipe attacker, with Magical Fire doing 120 to the active and 120 to the bench, at the cost of sending 2 energy attached to it to the Lost Zone. It got second at Merida Regionals this year and has seen play in the past in Armor Rouge decks as a solid bench snipe attacker. Radiant Hisuian Sneasler just won the largest Pokemon tournament of all time, with its ability putting 2 more damage counters on your opponent's poison Pokemon in between turns. The main use is in the Cloth Terapagos archetype, where Brute Bonnet can poison both active Pokemon, and with Binding Mochi and attackers like Budu, Cloth, and Terapagos EX, this damage can quickly add up. The other use in this deck is for the Pecharunt Donk. Pecharunt puts 5 more damage counters on poison Pokemon while it's in the active spot, so with the 50 from Runt, 10 from Brute, and 20 from Sneasler, you can do 80 damage on your first turn going first, giving you the ability to consistently donk your opponent before they set up if they have an 80 HP or less Pokemon as their only one in play. Thorton is a supporter card that lets you swap a basic Pokemon you have in play with a basic Pokemon from the discard pile, and all effects, turns in play, and damage remain on the new Pokemon. This card sees play mostly for its ability to recover a Pokemon that needs to evolve after its pre-evolution is knocked out. Decks that play Pidgeot EX are suddenly able to Thorton their Rotom V or other support Pokemon and swap it with a Pidgey, only to rare candy into the Pidgeot at the same time. It's not just good for Pidgeot decks, and it sees play in Charizard EX decks, Pidgeot control decks, Archaludon decks that play Dialga, and Terapagos EX Dusknoir decks. But quite frankly, any deck can take advantage of this card because it's just so versatile. Now we get to the heavy hitters, starting with Lost Vacuum. This is an item card that lets you put a card from your hand into the Lost Zone. If you do, put any tool attached to any Pokemon in play, or a stadium card in play and put it into the Lost Zone. This was, and still is, the go-to tool removal option in the game. This card saw play in literally every deck for its unique versatility and ability to remove disruptive stadiums like Path to the Peak or Temple of Sinnoh. It has won countless events and has countless great placements, since any deck can play this card for extra tool removal or just attack for some matchups. It's an incredible card and one of the greats of tool removal. Rotom V is a 190 HP basic lightning type Pokemon, mostly used for its instant charge ability. This lets you draw 3 cards, but it ends your turn immediately after. This card has seen top level success for a while now, mostly because slower decks that need to set up can just use the extra draw power on turn 1. Decks like Charizard EX, Pidgeot Control, Dragapult EX, and Snorlax Stall, most of which have won regionals, all use Rotom to great success. Rotom will undoubtedly go down as one of the greatest support Pokemon ever, and it's not that hard to see why, judging by its success. The last of the heavy hitters we need to talk about is Drapion V. This 210 HP Dark-type V Pokemon has the ability Wild Style. For each of your opponent's Single Strike, Rapid Strike, or Fusion Strike Pokemon in play, its attacks cost 1 colorless less. Its attack Dynamic Tail does 190 damage and 60 damage to one of your Pokemon. Mew VMAX was the best deck in the game for a while, and had a big target on its head. So this card felt like Pokemon's attempt to balance it with a tech option that can be easily splashed and one-shot Mew for 0 energy, due to weakness. With the Sky Seal Stone Tool card that lets you take an extra prize card, the Mew matchup could boil down to simply Boss KO Genesect and Sky Steel Stone Drapion on a Mew VMAX for game. It saw play in almost every deck during the Mew VMAX era. Decks like Lost Box, Lugia V-Star, and especially Rapid Strike Box, which otherwise had questionable Mew matchups, could tech this as a one-of answer. It even saw play after Mew and Battle-style Pokemon rotated in Lugia V-Star decks as a way to one-hit KO a Gardevoir EX. This card was always something to be aware of as a one-of tech for Mew, and it's just one of the best counter cards and tech cards of all time. After looking through the cards in this set, it begs the question, is Lost Origin actually the best set in Pokemon history? The cards in this set have a pretty impressive resume, so it might honestly be true, but I will let you guys decide. Anyways, subscribing would be greatly appreciated. I work hard on these videos. I'm actually in Vancouver as you're watching this, getting ready for the regional there, so I had to get this video out as soon as possible. Thank you guys so much for the support. I cannot express my appreciation enough. I never thought that only 2 months into this channel, I would already have you guys here with me. So thank you guys so much for that. Anyways, take care. Have a good one. Bye.